Welcome to the Startup Grind.
Come on up, Oren Etzioni. Let's go. Well done. Well done. So,
thank you.
Abhishek, can you hear me back there? Okay. Great. Well, so again, for those of you who have not been here before, this is just it's just a discussion between two human beings, one very smart, one so smart. We'll talk for 45 minutes-ish and open up for Q&A at the end. If you have a burning question and you just have to answer it, feel free to interrupt. We're okay with that, but try to hold it to the end. So, again, thanks for being here.
I think you're talking about questions where they're burning to ask,
yes.
Not to answer.
Yeah. That too. It's been many years since you're in that chair. Many years. So a lot of changes for you, and definitely what you're working on AI the last several years. So give us the shortened version of like what you guys do, because you know what's interesting when I say even the Allen Institute, people are like, what the heck do they do? Like many people say to me, what the heck do they do? I'm like, that's a good question. I should ask that. Like, what the heck do you do?
Sure. Let me give the slightly longer version, but cut me off if I'm going on too long. I think the first place to start with is over the last 10 years, but especially over the last 5 years, AI and the perception of AI have really changed. And so people more and more see how AI is relevant. And actually people more and more are afraid of AI in various ways. And so I think what I've realized over the last few years of talking to people about AI is that it's become more and more of what I would think of as a Rorschach test. In other words, you talk to people about AI, or people talk to me about AI, and they're expressing their concerns, and those can be about privacy, can be about jobs, about income inequality, about bias as it comes to race or gender, fairness, and so on. And more I realize that it's really reflecting their concerns about this rapidly changing world we live in and technology. So my first observation to you is AI, more than anything, is a Rorschach test. Now, as far as what we do at AI2, as we call ourselves, I'm an AI optimist, which means that I'm very aware of these different problems that I listed. I wanted to start with those just to highlight that those issues are very real. At the same time, I'm also keenly aware of the benefits.
Yeah.
There's tremendous potential benefits for AI, and what AI2 is about is exploring those tremendous potential benefits. So we're a nonprofit research institute of about 100 people. 5 years ago, there were, I think, about 2 of us, and so we've grown. We also have our own incubator, which is a little bit idiosyncratic in the sense that it's one of the world's only AI-based incubators, right? So to be a company in our incubator has to be focused on AI, and secondly, focused on AI for the common good. We don't try to help people click on ads or build surveillance products. We have a variety of companies that are trying to generate AI systems that make the world a better place. And if you ask me, I'll give you some examples, but I don't want to give a 20-minute answer to every question, so I'll stop here.
Okay, good. So, you guys, you strictly focus on AI, which is awesome, actually, because it gives you focus. It gives you, you have a niche, right? And people know you of that. I mean, you're somewhat. I would say most people in the U.S. know of AI. AI too, right? They know it, right? Because I was down the Bay Area last week, and people knew it, right? They talked about it. So that's a great thing. So what are the things in the companies you have? How many companies do you have there? Like, just give me a guess. Like, doesn't it be exact?
Less than 10 and more than 5.
Okay. So call it. We got 8 or 10 companies there, and are those companies that are there? Are they? Do they come with like you and I start a company, we go there, or do they come with a person, or do they come with an idea and you like go recruit a couple of people? How do those companies get there?
So we try to start at the very beginning, which means that we're very flexible in the model. Some of them are what's called spin-outs, right? There's technology developed at AI2 and we spin it out. A great example of that is xnor.ai, which started with research at AI2 about AI on the edge in a device like a phone or even a doorbell. And now it's a very successful company with probably more than 40 people. We also have spin-ins where some folks come with an idea and we try to vet it relative to our criteria, which I just mentioned. But we also have residence programs, CTOs in residence, CO in residence. We're constantly in the flow of very, very early stage companies having to do with cutting edge AI. And one thing I would add, because I mentioned a lot around people, if there's anything that working in AI for now, more than 30 years has taught me, is respect for the human mind, right? It's still the case that there is no substitute for what I see in the audience right here.
Yeah, exactly. They can't do that yet. Not yet.
No.
And for you, over the last, say, 3 years, what has been one of the more interesting projects? Like, give us a couple, one or two that, like, really, just for you personally, was interesting, and tell us why it was interesting for you.
Well, I love to start things, and I'm sure I share that with many folks in the audience.
Yeah.
One of the realizations we had maybe a couple of years ago, and this was a dialogue between the late Paul Allen and myself, was the fact that we have these tremendous successes of AI technologies, but in very narrow arenas like Go or speech recognition. But these kind of, I like to call them AI savants, these very narrow systems are brittle. Right? It's very easy, if you just change the way you ask Alexa a question, suddenly it can't answer it, right? If you have a medical AI system and you make a change to what it does, it can really fall apart, which is pretty scary. And one of the big things that these AI systems lack, which make them so brittle, is common sense. And I would define common sense is what all people have in spades, and computers don't. Right? So if we gave you a questionnaire, we might disagree on a lot of things. Politics.
No, that would never happen.
Maybe not. In fact, before she was asking me who's the celebrity that I wanted, and I don't know, I couldn't think of a good one. So, but now I want to say Barack Obama. So I don't know.
Holding hands with Taylor Swift?
No, just Barack Obama.
Okay.
Anyway, there's a bunch of things that I think we would agree on. Like if we put our socks in the drawer, they'll probably still be there tomorrow. Or if I look at that doorway, what's more likely to fit through there, a basketball or a Boeing 747 jet? Right? There's a bunch of questions that are so simple that we can answer them instantaneously and certainly and correctly, and yet computers can't. So that's a huge challenge that I'm excited about and we're working on. We have a project that's being led by Professor Yejin Choi, who shares her time between the University of Washington and AI2. And we're starting to think about this really tough problem of imbuing computers with common sense.
Yeah. And you touched on this when you were kind of talking about AI2 and about how humans are a little nervous, certain aspects of what you're working on. What things for you, because you're deep into it, what things for you are, maybe not nervous, but what things are you concerned about? And maybe not happening at AI2, but maybe happening elsewhere? Like, what are the things that you're like, not so great from my standpoint?
I would say that of the many legitimate concerns, the two that are foremost in my mind is one about jobs. So we're in a very long-term trend that's much broader than AI of digital technology, computers, email, reducing certain kinds of jobs. And that's a trend that's been going on for decades, and it's continuing and potentially accelerating. So what's going to happen to all these retail workers who are ultimately being displaced by e-commerce, and what's going to happen to all these transportation workers who are ultimately going to be displaced by autonomous vehicles of various sorts. And the other thing to remember is often these are some of the weakest members of society, right? They don't necessarily have a college degree, they don't necessarily have a high school degree, and I don't think it's likely that all these coal miners are going to turn into data miners. There was a headline like that a while back. So that's a huge concern of mine, and I think should be all of ours. And I don't have a simple solution, although I did write something about this in Wired a while back that you might want to look up if you're interested. The second concern, which also is a huge one, is as we develop this powerful technology, I'm not worried about it taking over as you see in Hollywood movies. I don't think that's a very realistic concern. But rogue actors, basically people, using AI technology in nefarious ways is also a very serious concern that definitely keeps me up at night.
Yeah. And in your position, because you see a lot of different things, right? I mean, that's actually what's great about your position. And in that, what are you seeing as a trend, or I don't think there's a better word for it. What are you seeing a trend in the last, say, 12 to 18 months, or where do you see it going in the next 12 to 18 months? Is there something that you're seeing that because you kind of got that bird's eye view, are you seeing anything that's either one, alarming, or two, just interesting as an opportunity?
Well, in the context of startups, what I would say is that this, I don't want to call it a trick because it's an approach. This approach of taking machine learning, and most recently deep learning, and using it to solve problems, this is something that I was fortunate enough to do at the company I founded with, it was backed by Madrona. It was actually incubated in what we called Madrona's daylight basement. So this is Madrona's daylight basement, right? So I think it was a different building, but equally nice view is that was Faircast, which used machine learning to predict and anticipate airfare fluctuations. Well, before that, and certainly after that, there's been an enormous number of startups that have used machine learning for a wide variety of applications, from healthcare to driving to spam detection. Alexa, very much powered by machine learning, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Well, you might think, gosh, if this has been going on for years, I'm late to the party. And let me assure you, if you have a machine learning-based startup in mind, and the IP ideas to back it up, I see Adam Phillip here, you're not late to the party. There are so many more applications in the enterprise, on the consumer front, in healthcare, in construction, in safety. It's really a tremendously versatile technology, and we're going to see more and more startups based on machine learning.
Yeah. And in today's world, as we sit today, when do you think it's going to happen where I can walk up to that wall, right, that glass wall, and take an image or take anything and what was the Minority Report or whatever, when can we do that? Like, when can we start to do that and really, for real, and it means something?
Well, let me take the easy way out. I'm a software guy, and that's a hardware problem.
Who knows? That's poor. Give me an answer.
7.325 years.
That's awesome. Where do you again, kind of taking your bird's eye view? Where do you see the gotchas for people that are starting to use ML and AI? Where are the gotchas for? I mean, you're seeing young entrepreneurs walking your door and saying, "Yeah, I got this great idea." Sometimes it's not. Sometimes it is. Where are the gotchas in your world? You see, issues, mistakes, problems occurring more often than not.
So there was just a few days ago an article by Andrew Ng in the Harvard Business Review, which is free, that addressed the same question. So let me give you the synopsis, but I see some of you taking notes. It's probably worth quickly reading the article, and no surprises, but really good common sense for somebody who's obviously a huge leader in the field and highly experienced. Where I like to start is with the data. We used to say back in the days when it was called data mining, no data mining. With this machine learning based AI, if you don't have data, you can't build the machine learning program or startup. Data is not enough. For example, we're inundated with data from satellites observing the Earth, from our telescopes looking into space, from our cash registers and so on. It needs to be labeled data, right? So you have to have data and you have to put it into these categories like successful transaction or not. So you need to have data, you need to have labeled data. People often miss that part. Then you need to have realistic expectations about what kind of accuracy you can get, right? So sometimes people have a wonderful solution, but again, it's not calibrated to that. And then there are many additional steps along the way. Let me just mention another one. Deep learning is the hottest thing going, but you don't always need deep learning to solve your problem. So sometimes people get into hot water by making it too fancy, too complicated. You want to have a small team, a well-defined problem, realistic expectations. A lot of common sense, but it's easy to get seduced by this shiny thing called deep learning or artificial intelligence.
And with deep learning and again ML, is there something that is not being or is being overlooked in your opinion? Is there something that's like, what is this? What is anyone missing something? And like, if you like, where's the hole? I always got to think there's got to be something that we've not thought of, or we're overlooking, or we're not. Our technology isn't advanced enough to do something. Is there some things that are missing?
I think there are so many things that are missing from this picture. Again, as a researcher for many years, I'm looking further ahead. So one we talked about, which is common sense. Again, it's not a startup. It's very much a basic research problem. Second one is more data efficient methods, right? We have the wonderful ability to learn even from a single example. These machine learning programs typically require very large numbers of labeled training examples. So can we build more data efficient methods? And I could go on and on. There's a lot of gaps. It's still very early in the evolution of these technologies.
And do you see enterprise? How deeply is AI getting integrated into enterprise?
I think different industries are different,
Yeah.
but again, it's still very early days there, if only because, again, depends on what kind of enterprise. I used to think enterprise only meant, like, I don't know, big trucking concerns or people who work with IBM, but, I don't know, companies in town like Redfin and Zillow
Sure.
and so on, they're enterprises. And of course, they're very sophisticated in their use of AI, as are Microsoft and Amazon. And
Is there an industry that's leading the way? Is there an industry that's doing better than most?
Well, I would say the tech industry is very much leading the way, tech
Sure.
and cloud. It's the industries like construction and medicine, more kind of old hard good industries that are have some real catching up to do.
Yeah. And where do you think the let's take real estate, like, because you mentioned Zillow, Redfin, they're local companies. Where do you and I are running them both, right? You got Redfin, I got Zillow, right? Where would
Can I have Zillow? Really market cap business.
And where would the
Stock is up 26%.
Yeah, are you know that?
No, just
that
read GeekWire. How many people here, by the way, read GeekWire? Just
Curious.
Excellent. Those of you who don't, you're missing out. And again, I have no stake in GeekWire. I'm just saying.
Your check's in the mail.
Oh, Alan.
Alan's here, yeah. And so if we were running real estate, our real estate companies, what would be the thing that you would say, here's something you should be using. Here's something you should be doing for your business. Like, if you were walking in as a consultant to help us grow or maintain our businesses.
Well, this isn't real estate specific, but it's applicable to this company as and many others. The tooling around AI is very, very primitive, right? So think about, I mentioned data and labeling data, but think about, for example, something like databases, right? Invented, I guess, in the early 60s or late 50s. You look like you were involved.
Yeah, no, it's just, I'm just thinking that when was database start? That was 60s, way back there.
Yeah, a long time ago. It took a while to mature, but once certain standard building blocks were set up, it became a very, very important part of many, many systems, applications, et cetera, et cetera. What was key for that to happen is, even though, I don't know, being an Oracle DBA is hard, there were a bunch of standards and a bunch of standard building blocks that most software engineers learned and were able to use. That's not the case in AI today. You really have to sweat, blood and tears. Sweat, blood, and tears all have to flow until you achieve a very successful application. It's not like you can just plug your data into, I don't know, Google Predict or some other thing and it'll just work out of the box. Very far from it. And so I think all these companies and others need better tools for AI, and of course that's a huge opportunity.
Yeah, exactly. And for your teams there at AI2, what's been one that's been very interesting for you from your standpoint? Like,
on the research side or on the incubator side?
Incubator side.
Okay, so let me give a couple of examples. So one example of a spin-in that I really love is a company called Blue Canoe. Anybody heard of Blue Canoe?
Wow.
All right. Founded and led by Sarah Daniels, who's an outstanding entrepreneur. She was in the real estate space before with Market Leader and other successes. And basically, it helps people pronounce their English better using both AI techniques and just some highly proprietary insights into pedagogy and education. Now, why is pronunciation important? A, there's a bunch of people I know, and I can't quite understand them. That's a smaller thing, but a much bigger thing is, think about the developing world where, say, if you live in, I don't know, Bangladesh or the Philippines, your road to the middle class is through a call center. But to get that great job in the call center, or a relatively good job, I should say, your English pronunciation has to improve. Well, they have built exactly the technology that supports that. So they're both selling it in Asia and internationally, as well as to technical companies in Seattle, because I think we all know folks who's, if they could just speak a little bit more clearly, it would be good for everyone. So that's an example of a spin-in. A spin-out that I'm super excited about. Actually, maybe this is a great chance. Rather than talking about it, I've been talking way too much. If we can get that video, I'm going to show you a video of a stealth ride. We now interrupt for a commercial break, literally. This looks like a commercial, but it's really a stealth company, and I'll explain what you're about to see after you see it.
Yeah, keep talking, Oren.
But I'll keep talking. Of course, hey, it's one of my specialties. I was at the University of Washington Computer Science Department for 25 years as a professor. And believe me, if you can't talk while the tech is booting, because UW didn't always have the most cutting edge tech, I see some people nodding, you have experience with that, then you got nothing. Actually, rather than that, I'm going to break the protocol, hey, it's Scrappy Startup, and take a question while we're
Yeah, go
getting
ahead.
set up.
Yeah.
About anything from anyone. Okay, in the back, first hand up, yeah.
Where? Oh, so is there an area within research, or classify them as breakthroughs, where you think we really haven't had a breakthrough yet in this area? And so I'm always kind of thinking like autonomous vehicles. Is that problem solved? Quantitative analytics, pretty close. Computer vision, still a lot of room. NLP, lots and lots of room. Like, is there one area you think that we just haven't really cracked the code yet?
I think that in all the areas you described, there are some very impressive advances and a lot of room to improve. But the biggest thing is all these AI systems, like the one that does vision or natural language processing, they're all specialists. And people, even 5-year-olds, are generalists. So where we really need breakthroughs is AI systems that can do more than one thing. Okay, so let's just play it and see what happens.
Let style last forever. Click here to shop the latest styles from the Style House. New collection and free shipping available. A new taste for a new year. Reserve now for our New Year's special menu. The moment you realize you just signed on your new home. Don't miss out. Book an appointment now. New York to the Maldives. New York to Greece. Exotic dream trips. 1-800-EXOTIC.
Okay, let's go that. So I just showed you a bunch of ads, and one of the sayings on the wall in AI 2 is some of the greatest minds in my generation are working on getting to people to click on ads. That sucks. Anybody knows the origin of that saying? Jeff Hummerbacher is one of the early employees at Facebook, but he left, and he's now working at Mount Sinai Hospital, or he was on saving people's lives. So what did you just see, other than some commercials? Anybody have a thought?
Commercials authored by an AI.
Commercials authored by an AI. Very close. Yes, Linda?
NLP grabs different things to pull together the clips.
Yeah, it was kind of choppy. The reason for that and the kind of, hey, AI did this flavor is that it was done in the last, like in an hour after a 48-hour hackathon. So not quite that. Yes?
So a custom AI built, a custom ad built by AI which you can click on the go based on your business.
Oh, that's cool.
Yeah, similar to this idea. So let me tell you, because again, the fact that you're not getting it proves my point. What you saw there was text to speech. The voices you heard that sounded with this imperfect audio quite natural were actually automatically generated by AI. What the person did is type the text, and a person actually created the pictures. We're not quite at that point. But we have a company in stealth mode that has arguably the world's best text-to-speech capabilities. And the goal isn't to create commercial, but think about somebody who can't speak.
You just type.
Right, all they can do is type, but they don't want to sound like Stephen Hawking. With apologies to the late Stephen Hawking. But you see my point. So this is really quite natural, and all it requires is to type, and you can get a variety of different voices. Pretty cool.
That is pretty cool. So how have you been working on that?
Just I'm actually that's A secret.
Okay.
It's very much in stealth.
I
don't really remember.
I can't really say, or I don't remember, whatever that is. Yeah. No worries. Okay, so where is go 24 months in advance? No, let's go 12 to 18 months in advance. Where is AI going to be, in Oren Etzioni's opinion? Like, where is it in a general sense? Again, we're 30,000 foot view.
Right. I like to say, or to quote the person who said, don't mistake a clear view for a short distance. So we really have a clear view of where AI should go over the years. And in 12 to 18 months, AI, certainly from the point of view of most of us, is going to be exactly where we are today. Which is to say, for example, with machine vision, we can do quite a good job with object detection, so long as the objects aren't in an overly unusual context. We're not particularly good at detecting actions. There are experiments with autonomous vehicles, but be careful where you're walking, right? As they found out in Arizona, if autonomous vehicles are around. So I think that in the short time frames, and a year is a short time frame as far as this goes, it's still very steady, except we'll continue to see exciting applications of machine learning. So, for example, this text-to-speech company that's going to be definitely announced in the coming months is one that's based on deep learning. Right? So we'll keep seeing exciting applications of that. But what we really want, right, is a doctor based on machine learning. It's going to take, he laughs, it's going to take a really long time. Think how amazing that would be, because there's so many places, whether it's in rural America or in the third world, or even in, I don't know, Puerto Rico, where there aren't enough doctors, and they're not available 24/7, and those that are available are very expensive. Wouldn't it be great if at least some level of diagnostic care and medicine was much more affordable?
Yeah, because we can already do some of that right now. Like when we can, via internet, we can operate, right? We can use, I can be sitting here and operate in Puerto Rico as long as there's a connection, right?
Right, so telerobotic surgery, actually, Blake Hannaford at the University of Washington is a huge leader in that space. We've been working on it for decades. My brother is actually a surgeon, and often he says the robots, surgery these days very much what's called laparoscopic. I think laparoscopic means particularly painful. They have to make a smaller incision, but then often the work is robot assisted.
Yeah, exactly. Questions, guys? Feel free to start bringing them up. Go all the way in the back.
So I love what you were talking about with AI for the betterment of society. And I'm familiar with Japan and their Society 5.0, and I think Germany calls it Industry 4.0. Basically, how do we use AI to plan ahead for that future 50 years from now, for that new age of what humanity and society looks like? I'm just curious, where do you think the charge should sit? Is it public-private? Is it investors? Is it the scientific and academic community? Is it journalists keeping everyone honest? Where do you think the best and first place is to start on that?
That's a really great question, because I was getting worried as you were discussing this. Like, again, am I going to have to say I don't know again? But I have an easy answer. It's definitely all of the above. So each of those communities or sectors that you described have an important thing to contribute, whether it's journalists like Alan is here, or whether it's universities where often some of the craziest, most innovative ideas come from. So I think that we need to have a thriving ecosystem and marketplace of these, and that also includes oversight and conversations about where do we set appropriate limits and how.
My question is regarding those voices and public and possible copy of the human images, creating somebody's identity and making fake let's say, videos and then presenting as evidence of somebody done something, when in reality maybe it's a fake video.
So like we made up like Barack Obama was doing
Right,
something.
and then
yeah.
somebody presenting that as, oh, that's actually fake, so maybe this video is also fake, so you can't commit this person for this crime, you know, and those, and things like that going into the effect, because technology just evolves so fast, you know.
Yeah, it's a very difficult question. And, you know, it's with images and now with video and with things like this with voice, as you alluded to, and, you know, Google Duplex got people, you know, scared about that. Fortunately, I have a partial answer, because it's a very tough question, and that answer is actually going to be published hopefully this week. And it was in response to, but you get to hear it here first. This was in response to, how many people heard of OpenAI's GPT-2? Okay, a few of you. So those of you who haven't, OpenAI, which is a research lab in the Bay Area, developed a text generation model, right? So not just text-to-speech, but actually generating the text that created such a high-quality facsimile or forgery of human text that they at least deemed it as too dangerous to release. So they described their results, but they refused to release their model. You typically release things in the research world. It was a huge brouhaha. What it did is heighten the awareness of exactly the issue that you're talking about, which is in this world that's coming, where AI has unprecedented abilities to counterfeit anything and everything, how are we going to know what's real? As somebody put it, the very fabric of reality is under siege. Then I took that sentence out because it sounded too bombastic. So what do we do? Deciding whether, say, an image or a paragraph is authentic is going to become increasingly difficult. One partial solution is at least to know what the source is, so you can choose whether to believe in it or not. Say, well, if this video, you know, came from my friend Oren, I'll believe it's at least, you know, authentic, particularly he says he authored it. Or even if this email came from Oren, then at least I know he came from Oren. But the wild thing is that we can't be sure, right? Sourcing is really problematic on the internet, right? So how do we make sure that the email that you got from me really came from me, that the video was really created by me, not me, but, you know, an appropriate source, et cetera, and I realized that I will save the punchline of that. You'll have to look it up when it appears. I have an answer.
Key signing parties?
I'm sorry?
Key signing parties?
Keep signing.
PGP. Key
Crypto.
signing.
Yeah, it's very much related to that. But how many people use PGP signing here in this room?
3.
Okay, therein lies the rub.
So explain that what it is to the audience that doesn't.
I'm sorry. So there are tools today based on encryption that allow you to assure another party that the message you sent was indeed sent by you. So that's the non-technical explanation. So you can assure somebody that even though you're communicating over the internet, which of course is insecure, that the message really came from you.
So you know it came from Mike and it came from Oren. It didn't come from Mark or Bill or Joe. Okay.
Kai-Fu Lee came and spoke a couple months ago about artificial intelligence developments in China. And he was talking about how in China they're targeting, instead of the first world, sort of second world and third world applications of AI. And that the US is going after more of the high dollar, high ticket, high value AI solutions. Do you agree with that? Is AI targeted at the privileged, if you will, top first world issues, the problems that we're working on here, or do you disagree?
I both agree and disagree. I think Kai-Fu Lee, and I highly recommend his book, is one of the folks who really knows AI. He and I actually got our PhDs at CMU just a few years apart, I bought his old vacuum cleaner.
That is a trivia question.
Was it artificial intelligence?
It was just a vacuum cleaner. AI was not nearly as advanced at the time. There was no Roomba. It was just a vacuum. But that's not important. What's important is that he knows what he's talking about, both in terms of AI and in terms of China. And definitely, we tend to target what we know. And so China has a tremendous edge in terms of tackling problems that are meaningful to the Chinese consumer. The part where I disagree is if you look at companies here, whether it's a Blue Canoe as a small example, or a company like Facebook, while not my favorite company, certainly has shown their ability to take their product and adapt it to the developing world extensively. If you see companies like Amazon who've created versions of their product in India and places like that, I think we also have a non-trivial ability to tackle those problems. So I generally agree with him, but I think it's a little bit more nuanced than that.
Thank you. All right. Yeah.
Yeah. So, it's funny you mentioned Kai Fu Lee's book. I read it, and one of the things he
I didn't mention it, he did.
So,
I-
but you
sorry,
have his
you're right,
vacuum
you're right. I
cleaner,
mentioned the
which
book.
is even better. One of the things he talks about in his book, and this always is kind of something that interests me, everything is published, right? All the research is published, and I don't know, we would, I've been in the software industry for a while, and we would no sooner tell a competitor, how we made a protocol faster or had some competitive advantage than I don't know what. But, now everything seems to be published in the AI space. And, he talked about how major breakthroughs would probably not be published, right? Things that really gave someone a huge competitive advantage would probably be withheld. And so, when GTP2 came out, and, there's a group who I'm working with and we're fooling around with it, do you think maybe that's why they didn't really publish the full model, because they want to keep it as a competitive advantage? Or some argue maybe it isn't such a breakthrough,
Yeah, so I would say that, let me put it this way. I haven't studied the model closely. Certainly, as you mentioned, some folks like Chris Manning from Stanford have argued that it's not such a breakthrough. But what an amazing marketing move, right? If you don't publish, everybody's publishing, look at my model, look at my cool thing. If you say, my thing is so cool that I can't even let you touch it, that was 80% of the brouhaha. So whatever it is, whether they should have published it or not, it was a brilliant marketing move. Excuse me, you had a question earlier. Yeah.
Yeah. For those who are not on the technical side of the AI, what would be your recommendation in terms of what to learn or what to focus on to understand AI better and actually prepare maybe a future from a professional standpoint?
Yeah, a great question. So first of all, sometimes when
One second, Oren. Can everyone hear that question? I want to repeat that because it was a good question. She's asking that for someone new to the AI world, what should she be focusing on as a career, like skills, etc.
particularly as a non-technical person.
Yeah.
So there's so much excitement about technology and tech, and I'm part of that. It's really important to remember that technology goes nowhere without the appropriate human skills, business skills, value proposition, etc. So the first thing I would say is, if you're a non-technical person, don't worry. We need you. That's point number one. Point number two, okay, but it's helpful if the non-technical person understands what the technology is doing. Otherwise, you might find yourself in the White House or something. Sorry. Let's strike that from the record. So how do you make sense of it? To me, what's really important is to play with it. And so when you see all kinds of, videos, cherry-picked examples, of course this was What I showed you was a little bit cherry-picked. It seems really amazing. It's really important to get your hands on it and play with it. So take Alexa, for example. You ask it some questions, or Siri, not to pick on Alexa. Seems pretty amazing. You ask it different questions and you're like, I can't believe it. I ask it the same question, it can't get that. So one of the things that we do at AI2 is really try to put out demos of the software we build, and open demos, not just that you can access them, but you can play with them and pose your own questions and get a sense of what it can and cannot do. So for example, if you want to have a sense of the state of the art in natural language processing, go to allennlp.org. Allen is in Paul Allen's name, nlp.org, one word. We have about 12 demos there that show you the technology doing some pretty cool things. But then, for example, if it's doing reading comprehension, you can type in your own paragraph, ask your own questions, and if you kick the tires a little bit, you'll quickly see where it crashes and burns. And the same is true for many other things. We have a demo called ImSitu, IMSITU, I think it's imsitu.org. You upload an image, and it tells you amazing things about what's happening in the image, not just the objects, but also the actions. So that's very cool. But if you, again, change the images in certain ways, you'll also see where it falls apart. So my biggest advice to you, kind of in 10 seconds, is don't believe in anything you can't play with yourself. And there are a lot of demos out there that you can actually use yourself.
So that's allennlp.org.
Yes. And our website is allenai.org, and again, you'll see open source software, data sets, demos, leaderboards, a lot of things that are tangible, right? Everything I'm saying, with the exception of that video, is talk. Okay, talk is cheap. Show me the AI in action.
All the way back.
So, as somebody who's 70 years old, and a member of the generation that controls 73% of the wealth in America,
Don't rub it in.
I just ran a panel where I used that data point to clarify where the money really was. What do you see happening in the near term, my way, where what you're working on is going to have the greatest impact?
Well, I think the most tangible and dramatic example is starting with the fact that we have 40,000 deaths on our highways in the U.S. each year, and on the order of 1 million injuries. Nick Wingfield is a Seattle-based reporter. I saw on Twitter a while back he was hit by a car. Thankfully, he's fine. It was being driven by a 90-something-year-old man. I don't think it was Prince Philip. I think it was somebody else. But so I think something very relevant to you and me. I'm not 70, but I'm getting there. Is that we want to be able to keep driving, keeping mobile, keeping independent. At the same time, we don't want to hurt anybody, right? Likewise, I have a 20-year-old, and very hard not to text and drive. I'm sure he doesn't do it, but maybe some of his friends do. Well, to solve these problems, to save people's lives, to reduce these millions of injuries, what we need is safety devices in our cars, followed by autonomous vehicles. That's coming. And that's great. And it's not great because I love AI or because we're going to solve the trolley problem better. Those of you who are familiar with that. It's simply great because it's going to save lives, reduce traffic congestion, and allow us to be autonomous to spend our 73%.
So obviously AI2 is a research institute and an incubator both. Has to make a lot of decisions about what research directions are likely to be fruitful, what experiments are likely to give us some interesting insight. So as you're making decisions about that, what theory of mind would you say guides your predictions? Would you say you sort of try to capture different alternatives for how the mind might work? Would you say you try to, would you say you're a modularist? Would you say, just tell us about that.
Yeah, rephrase that. So what drives that decision? Because you're
well, specifically what
overall.
What set of assumptions about the workings of the I
Wow.
know that's a 30-minute question, so.
Yeah, it's really though a great question, and by modularist you're alluding to Jerry Fodor's work, for example.
I
So-
wasn't necessarily asking, are you a modularist or not, just, I was trying to give an example of the kind of
Different types.
system, yeah. that was-
So here's what I would say very quickly. There are at least 4 major approaches to studying the mind. One is captured by the Allen Institute of Brain Science, where we look at the hardware and specifically at people's brains and neurons. 2 is cognitive science or cognitive psychology, where again we look at people, but not at the hardware level, but more of it at the behavioral level. What do they do and how do we build systems that do that? The third approach is the mainstream AI approach, which you might call more of a constructivist enterprise. We're trying to build systems that do intelligent things, or at least do things that we used to think required human intelligence until we built a program to do those. My approach, more than anything, is an empirical approach, and this goes straight to Newland Simon's Turing Award lecture, Computer Science as an Empirical Inquiry. I believe in anything and everything once I see it working. So at AI2 we have a saying, it's actually written on our wall, failure is an option. You know, some places are very macho, failure is not an option. We say we're at the cutting edge, failure is an option, failure to measure is not an option. So what we insist on is developing all kinds of ideas and subjecting them to scientific experimental verification. Now, there's many more issues having to do with philosophy of mind, but we should get into those more offline.
Hi, I want to get your take on where the nation's discussion around privacy is going. I think a lot of the innovation that has happened to now has been because the concerns around privacy haven't been as prevalent as they are now. I'm curious to get your take on where you see that direction currently going and where it should go, and whether AI2 foresees policy advocate as part of its efforts going forward with AI.
Sure. So the question is, where is privacy? Where is it going? In parentheses, things are really bad, aren't they? Are you going to do something about it? Paraphrase less politely than the original question, which is a great question. So I completely agree with your assessment of the dire state of affairs. The way I like to describe it dramatically, there was a photo a while back that showed Mark Zuckerberg with a laptop, and he had a piece of duct tape put over the camera in his laptop, and now we just find out that half of our airplanes have cameras looking at us that we didn't know about, and of course Google Nest has a speaker in it. So basically, if the person with one of the very best IT and security teams in the world feels like he's got to put a piece of duct tape over his camera, your privacy is dead. We ain't got no privacy. That's the reality. Now there's one thing, actually 2 things working in our favor. One is if it's me or you, perhaps, hopefully nobody cares. And so we're a little bit less subject to attack on privacy than Mark Zuckerberg. But the second thing is that Capitol Hill has gotten the memo on this, and there is more and more interest amongst the political establishment, both here and in Europe, around that. Now, in Europe, they've chosen a very simple solution. I don't know if anybody been to Europe in the last 6-12 months. How many extra times did you have to click on disclosures before you could do anything? So Europe's approach to that is to make you click on the GDPR or however that's pronounced, disclosure. It doesn't strike me as a very effective approach. We do need more effective approaches, and people are working on it. Now, as far as AI2, we are not a policy advocacy group at this point. It is something that we're thinking about. The challenge is to have original, impactful ideas. So if you have ideas about how to help privacy, I'd love to hear them via email or otherwise, and then I'll take them write about. No, I always try to give credit where credit is due. I don't have any great ideas. I do think it's a very real issue, and it is one that we're thinking about. I should mention that AI2, our mission, as I mentioned, AI for the common good, we don't use user data. Our data, for example, when we're studying common sense, when we're using AI in the context of science and other ways, is publicly available data. Unlike Facebook and others, we don't gather or use your data. We also don't make any money, right?
Okay.
My hope, I guess, with AI is that we as humans will be able to be more creative. It'll be a tool that takes away all the repeatable crap we have to do in our lives and moves us up the ladder. Am I dreaming, or is that really what AI can deliver for us in the next 10 or 20 years?
I'm really sorry. Can you repeat the question? I just spaced out after a long day.
What I'm saying is that go back 50 years before we had PCs and whatever. We had very simple ways of getting things done. Technology has allowed us all to move up the ladder, I think, in my mind, as far as being more creative. So I'm trying to look at AI as not being a negative thing, but being a very positive thing that's going to bring us, take away all that crap and do it with AI. Allow us to be creative beings, which we've got in our brains, we just don't use them. So do you believe that I'm crazy, or am I on the right track?
I definitely don't believe that you're crazy. I think that is one dimension of the optimistic view. And the way I like to put it is, think of AI as standing for augmented intelligence. And then think about all the AI system that you're already using. For example, the Google or Bing search engine, right? A lot of AI systems built into that. How many people have used the translation software, Google Translate or some other thing, right? That's AI par excellence. So it's constantly the case that AI is empowering us. When I was talking about autonomous vehicles, it's important to understand these vehicles are going to make us a lot safer, but they're not going to decide where to go. Right? It's not like you get into this car and you say, "Hey, I want to go, I want to go home," and it's like, "Nah, let's go to a bar and have a few drinks." That's not how it works, right? So AI is very much a tool, and it's a potentially very empowering tool, potentially empowering of our creativity, both by reducing the drudgery that we have to engage in, and by giving us more successful tools. So a project I haven't mentioned yet is Semantic Scholar. It's an AI-based search engine for scientists, medical researchers, and ultimately everyday folks who want to be educated about science. It uses AI to cut through the clutter and help you home in on the information you're looking for. And it's a very popular project. We have millions of users each month. Check it out at semanticscholar.org. And it's meant to do exactly what you're talking about, make the literature search more efficient, so that you, as a scientist or a researcher, can do a much better job on the more creative stuff that machines still cannot do.
Mm-hmm. Two more questions, guys.
Do you mind if I take this one?
Yeah.
Please.
Me? Yeah. Well, speaking of GDPR, so one thing it does well, I thought, is that it gives users access to all the data that a organization stores about them, so you can download all of it, and also the ability to delete it. Now, if you think of a model that was built based on user data, based on some behavior, that's a derivative of this user data. What rights do you think somebody should have to that derivative? Should they be able to say things like, well, I want you to unlearn all behavior based on me? Maybe impossible, actually. Or should they be compensated in some way? I'm asking because I read an article about this, and I thought it's very murky territory.
I do think it's very murky and it's outside my area of expertise, but you're making a good point that GDPR isn't just about those annoying clicks. At the same time, it's very tricky. The New York Times had an article called "The Tyranny of Convenience." And basically we collectively have shown that we're willing to trade away an enormous amount of information about ourselves for a bit of convenience. I, for example, tried to delete a bunch of information out of Google Maps, but it's cleverly designed so that I also can't get a lot of the features. And finally, I just gave up. I'm like, whatever, track my movements. I just want to be able to go back to that, wonderful Thai place in Portland next time I'm there.
Last question, guys. Who's it going to be? Go ahead. Oh, you know what, Warren? We've got those T-shirts.
Oh my gosh. The most important part of the day. So if you've asked a question, actually, let's not take our time. If you've asked a question, please come up and I will give you a wonderful, free, and very soft and fluffy AI2 T-shirt. Unfortunately, I only got one size, so it might not fit, but then you can give it to somebody else. You could sell it on eBay.
In an ever polarizing world, from your professional opinion, do you believe AI in the future will open our minds or close our minds?
Again, I think your question and the answer to it really illustrates the key thing about technology. It's one step forward, one step back. It has trade-offs built into it. So it will definitely open our mind, right? Semantic Scholar is an example of that we've been working on for years. It's going to make it easier for you to find information. And even if you're not a technologist, when I have a medical condition, that's my first stop because it's got all kinds of medical information. It really makes it easier to find. So it opens my mind. At the same time, we know that the adaptive algorithms in Facebook and YouTube and others have led people down garden paths that are very much mind-clothing. We have all kinds of echo chamber effects that are amplified by technology. So the answer is very clearly yes and no.
Thank you. Thanks for taking the time from the family. Thanks for being here. As always, you're wonderful. So I'll see you in another 4 years or so. We'll touch base again. And next month, we're right here in the same spot, last Tuesday of the month. We have an AR/VR panel discussion. So a really interesting group, three CEOs from AR/VR companies here locally. And until next time, be safe. You can hang out here for a few minutes and have a great month and have a great day. Take care. Bye-bye.